Prime Minister Mark Carney's cabinet is in Toronto for a second day of meetings. Parliament is set to return in less than 2 weeks, and Carney says his government will deliver a budget that focuses on both austerity and investments this fall. Now, all of this comes as Canadian priorities are shifting away from Trump and his tariffs and back to concerns about affordability and housing. Leger has released new data this week on how public opinion has changed in recent months. So in May, right after the election, 29% of Canadians said the issue they were most concerned about were the U.S. tariffs, just right at the top there. This was followed by 11% concerned about inflation, 7% about health care, and 6% about taxes. Well, let's compare that to August and where things were then, where public opinion has shifted significantly. The top concern for Canadians now is inflation and cost of living. That's at 44%. It's followed by housing and job creation, both at 24%, and then U.S. trade, with 23% saying it should be the priority of the government. Well, joining me now to talk about all of this is Sébastien Dallaire, the Executive Vice President of the Eastern Canada team at Leger. He can walk us through these numbers better than I can. Sébastien, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here, sir.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so let's look at the shift from May to August. What do you think has attributed to this change in the public's priorities and the public mood?
Interestingly, what we're seeing is a return to pre-Trump, pre-election concerns. For the past 2 years before this, it was about affordability, cost of living, access to housing, and this is what we're seeing again. What is different is now Trump, compared to where we were a few months ago, where everybody was worried about Trump, there was a lot of fear. Now Trump is the main backdrop to the same concerns that were there about a year ago. So the context has shifted quite a bit, but those concerns are very much the same they were about a year ago.
So you presented all of this and had a discussion with the cabinet, and I know it's a private conversation, but I'm wondering what insights you gave them in terms of, how does Trump intersect with this? Because inflation and Trump seem connected to me with tariffs and all the economic uncertainty. I mean, is this they're now concerned about the consequences of Trump and how you respond to it, or they've just moved on from Trump and he's just kind of baked in as noise in the background now?
I think he's been normalized a little bit. Canadians understand that things are going to, we'll still be in kind of a bit of a roller coaster with Donald Trump in coming years. And now it's how do we deal with this? What's the impact on Canada? And what can the government do to try to help us navigate through this new reality? So it's really about the impact of this trade war and of other Trump actions on people's wallets. It's really about finances and the economy. So what do we do now? What's the specific impact of what Trump is doing on us as Canadians? That's really what comes out of this.
Right, because there's a link there, right? Like, housing, there's a bunch of things you need to do domestically on that, but inflation and job creation, it's tough to really drive those without resolving the U.S. situation, right? Can you really address one issue without addressing the other?
Exactly, and that's exactly what's happening. So the issues remain very similar, but what's changed is now you have this Trump factor that Canadians understand it's difficult, it's out of your control. It's not, you cannot control what Donald Trump is going to do on a daily basis. So what you need to do is make sure that you shore up the economy, you find ways to protect yourself against what might be coming in coming weeks, coming months. And that's what we're seeing in our results.
So there has been more of a focus. I mean, Trump just blotted out the sun. It was an eclipse, right? When he stormed into office in the early part of the year. Now the Prime Minister and his government, they're talking a lot more about major projects, the domestic agenda, expanding trade. When you look at this shift, I mean, is that the right political approach for them to be focusing on those issues that are more in their control than just the U.S. trade issue?
It's funny because I think today, I heard Mark Carney talk about let's focus on what we can control. And in a way, that's what we are seeing in the data. Canadians are kind of aware that it's very hard to control Donald Trump. If you look at what's happening with other countries, other trade partners, Canada is not really treated any different, and that's the new reality. So now we can focus on what can we do ourselves to really try to help each other out, make sure that we're less susceptible to the Trump shock. That really comes out strongly in everything we talk about in our polling.
Okay, one last quick question. I mean, the Prime Minister here, Mark Carney, was elected mostly to be the guy to deal with Donald Trump. And we're in this pattern we're in now. Are they politically vulnerable, or are the Liberals still in decent shape? Is the government still on sound footing in your data?
Mm-hmm. They're still on sound footing. It's a period of both risks and opportunities for the government, because Canadians are still giving the government the benefit of the doubt. Their numbers are very stable. The honeymoon, in a way, continues, but maybe we shouldn't be talking about honeymoon more than a bit of a wait and see moment where voters want to know where we're going, and they want to see action. They want to see what exactly is going to happen in coming months. So there's a bit more openness to large projects, but of course the question will be, what exactly do we want to do and why? That's something that the government will need to do. Explain to Canadians how the major projects will help shore up the economy and help them individually. That's what they want to know.
Sébastien Dallaire with Leger. Always appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, so that's what Canadians see as the top issues facing the country. Deep concerns over how all of this uncertainty is affecting their wallets and their lives. Well, at that cabinet retreat in Toronto today, some key ministers spelled out some of the things they are planning in response.
We need to protect jobs, and we need to create some at the same time. And we're doing that through three different ways. The first one, obviously, is defense. We're the only G7 country that doesn't have a defense industrial strategy. That time is up, and we're working on it.
You heard that Mr. Sabia was meeting senior officials of the United States government yesterday. All of this work, as the Prime Minister said, is in the hopes that we can come to a deal with the United States to bring some relief on those sectoral tariffs.
Okay, so a lot of big issues for the cabinet to talk about, a lot of big issues for the power panel to talk about. Luckily, they're here. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Michelle Cadario was Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Paul Martin. Amanda Galbraith was an advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan cabinet minister. Good to see you all, gang. Thanks for being here.
Hey, David.
Thanks for having us.
Andrew, let's start with you. The wait and see period that Sébastien Dallaire just talked about there, that they put their faith in the government in the election. They want to start seeing some results, Canadians do, in the next little while. Maybe major projects next week. Where do you think the government is at this point?
It's a good question as to how much runway the government has to actually deliver on its agenda. It is obviously taking the summer to kind of sort through its priorities. It's a bit of a Gordian knot as to what do you pull to try to sort through the need to rein in spending, but at the same time invest in new sectors, make major projects happen. How do you get all that sequenced? And, you know, I think as we've discussed many times before, they weren't left with a lot by the Trudeau government. And so a lot of this is new thinking, starting from scratch. But the pressure will be on to show that they can make projects happen quickly, that they can start to turn around the economy, and that they can address these lingering problems that are there in terms of inflation and housing. Even though I do think, and it was maybe touched on a little bit in the interview segment, the reasons for that inflation pressure is a little different, I think, now than what it was seen to be 2 years ago. Obviously, the tariffs are having an impact, and any of us who go grocery shopping and see that letter T next to the price, we know that those counter tariffs that have been put on, are driving up prices. So the government has to move on multiple fronts at once. And it's going to have to show that it's got the domestic priorities in place and that they've got an agenda to move on it.
So Amanda, no pressure, no big issues to deal with, right? As Andrew lays it out. I mean, all of those are, an issue that dominates a year, and they're all happening kind of at the same time for this government.
For sure. And I think, when we were looking at the last election, no matter who was going to be the prime minister, across the board, this is going to be a tall order to right the ship after, I think, a decade of growing bureaucracy, lack of action, economic headwinds we're facing from the U.S., and I think also stuff that's been built here in Canada. The issue, I think, candidly, the Carney government truly faces, it's all fine and good. They've had this, cabinet retreat where everybody's talking about all the action they're taking, but they've been in government for several months now. This is a prime minister who is coming here to be a man of action. We have some offices set up. We've got a lag and a drag on getting a deal with the U.S., and maybe that's strategic. But at the end of the day, I think Canadians need to see results beyond appointing very prominent people to big roles and not actually having any of these major projects rolled out, not actually having these deals happen. And then you have kind of ministers have bozo eruptions like we saw around this is not the Wild West, and we saw a crime spree in Ontario and other areas of the country that frankly have people scared. So I think they've got a lot of challenges facing them. And to my mind, I think the Prime Minister is obviously quite effective, but he is one man and he's got a cabinet that has yet to, I think, mobilize behind him or move a lot of these priorities forward.
Right. Well, Michelle, it sounds like we're going to get a list of projects next week, right? They've got their caucus retreat out in Edmonton. They've got, the new CEO of the Major Projects Office appointed based in Calgary. They want to have something to put in the window before they go back to Parliament. So, I mean, what do you think of the challenges ahead and the progress made to this point?
Well, first, it hasn't been that long since they've been elected. So I think that Canadians are rightly giving them some breathing space to try and get things done. The Prime Minister talked about during the election campaign the very same things, that the U.S. situation is out of our control. And so we've got to take control of the things that we can. We've got to, change what we can in terms of the economy and reboot it and kind of retarget it to different markets and to having a much different domestic industrial policy. And so I think that they're very focused in on that. And you don't turn things around overnight. And I think Canadians understand that. That being said, with Parliament opening and a lot of promises, kind of deadlines that they made in terms of getting the Major Projects Office up and running, the Build Home Canada project office, getting that going. I think you're going to see some of these things kind of coming into fruition. Mark Carney's a very methodical, thoughtful person. He likes a plan, he likes a rollout strategy, and he likes to have things very crisp and tied up before they're rolled out. And so I think that you're starting to see that. And I think that there's going to be quite a few announcements leading up to the budget when he lays out his fiscal priorities and fiscal plan for the coming years.
Right. And well, Emily, while he does plan and does that, there is a worsening economy. Certain sectors are really getting hurt, and a lot of Canadians are feeling kind of the pain, right? So while there seems to be patience and a recognition that Trump is driving a lot of it, people are going to be needing some kind of a result pretty soon, it seems.
I'm so looking forward to that budget. I don't think I've ever been looking forward to a budget this bad. And I think a lot of Canadians are really eager to see what's going to be in there as well. I think I'm also eager to see what's going to be the state of affair in terms of actually being able to pass bill in Parliament. And that's when I think you're going to see the cracks in the enthusiasm is about even just next week with the major projects are being announced. People will have a lot to say about whether they like that list or whether they like those or why or why not. And so that's going to be where the debates start. And that's in terms of like policy decision. But beyond that, I do think that what we've seen in the last couple of months that we don't usually see in terms of federal politics is the Prime Minister basically traveling abroad constantly, and especially in Europe. Because in terms of overhauling our economy, in terms of making it less dependent on the United States, what it means is coordination with a lot of other players around the world. And so to be able to have some clarity in terms of what you do strategically in terms of your domestic position, there are a lot of moving parts that are actually beyond you, depending on what, for example, Europe is interested in.
Right.
And so that depended on negotiations. And so I think in terms of the methods, I do understand that it took a while for people to make decisions, but at the same time, coming this fall, as in now, there's also going to be time for criticism of what actual decisions are made with the moving parts so that we now have more clarity on, given the different trips that were made during the summer.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what's on the project list, but what's not on the project list could be where there's a lot of friction. But look, dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump and jolting the Canadian economy, they, of course, are at the top of Cabinet's to-do list at this week's retreat. But finalizing plans for the budget that Emily is anticipating more than any other budget, the Prime Minister says that budget will be a mix of austerity and investment. That's also a pretty key task.
We need to reduce spending, but we also need to invest because this is a pivotal moment in our nation's history. Canadians have been tightening their belt for quite some time. Times have been challenging for many families across the nation. So it's only normal that from a government perspective, we do the same.
It's just a question of making smart choices. But in order also to continue to thrive in this very complicated and dangerous world, we need to make sure that we're taking care of our investments at home.
Okay, so Andrew, we know that the government wants to spend big, to build big, but the Prime Minister's also given this directive, find 15% in reductions or recalibrations or savings or whatever, or cuts starting, and we're going to see it in this budget. I mean, you've done budgets. How do you do austerity and investment when you've got the COVID debt and the threat of Trump?
Yeah, this is a really, really tough act that the Finance Minister has. It's interesting that the messaging has changed a little bit. Certainly in the summer, what we were hearing out of Ottawa is that this budget that was coming down the fall, of course, the spring budget didn't happen. This budget was going to focus almost exclusively on righting the ship, getting the finances in shape, doing fairly significant cuts, putting a few things out in terms of strategies of where they were going to go, but then focusing in the next budget in the spring, so it's basically 6 or 7 months on, with a major investment kind of strategy that started to look at productivity, started to look at some of those major structural pieces that need to be fixed within the Canadian economy. I don't know how much that strategy has shifted, whether we'll see those kind of converge now in the fall, whether the expectations are a lot bigger. They need to put more in the window around those pressures on investment. But it is going to be a bit of a balancing act to significantly pull back. I mean, 15% is not a small cut. To pull back that kind of spending at the same time that you need to free up space to make investments in I'm assuming both infrastructure, physical infrastructure, but also the human capital in the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's not on every bit of government spending, but it's not enough that you're looking at $25 to $30 billion. And Michelle, like, you have some experience working with former Finance Minister and Prime Minister Paul Martin on dealing with difficult budgets at difficult times. There's going to be a lot of money for defense. You heard the industry minister talking earlier about an industrial policy, like this is going to be a job creation and an economic driver, as well as meeting a NATO target. But that's big money with not a lot of fiscal wiggle room right now.
Well, it is big money, but think back, the Prime Minister, when he first started talking about the budget that he was going to be putting forward, he was talking about separating it out between your capital expenditures, so your roads, your bridges, your sewers, your defense systems, any kind of defense procurement, versus your operating kind of budget. And the goal, I think, is to bring down the operating side in terms of the actual, that kind of spending. And so when you look at it in that way, I think that's what they're really talking about, where you're going to try and marry bringing, having this investment and then having this austerity. Now, it's going to be difficult. Like the number to cut in any of those departments in such a short period of time is going to cause quite some upset, and it's going to mean rethinking how they do things. And it's going to mean, some things just don't happen anymore. But if he's committed to actually bringing about this change, the structural change, not just in the economy, but the structural change in the government is going to have to go hand in hand. So I, like Emily, I'm very much looking forward to what's in this budget.
Well, Amanda, when we see the tables which tell us what spend less, invest more means, I don't think the invest more side is going to upset some people, but the spend less side, as Michelle describes it, on operations, you're talking programs, you're talking jobs, potentially, or people at minimum moving jobs. This is where you start running into political difficulty at a time that you're also dealing with these other significant challenges like the trade issues.
Yeah, not to mention just the slogan, spend less, invest more, is like a Seinfeldian comedy of errors. I feel like it's a Veep slogan they would have thought up there. I mean, at the end of the day, what is going to happen is we're going to see probably one of the biggest deficits we've ever seen from a government, because there's no way we're getting into golden domes and a new major defense strategy and that not happen. And I think Godspeed to them cutting 15% of operating versus capital. At the end of the day, it's the same tax dollars, but I would like to see the government shrunk like everyone else. I think it's grown exponentially under the same ministers who are currently in charge. So it's all fine and good for the Prime Minister to say, I want this to happen. At the end of the day, he has to have a cabinet that can execute those directions, and I think that is going to be a real challenge for him. He also has a bureaucracy that is going to be opposed to this, and they're going to move muscle and make this incredibly difficult to action out. So I think that's going to be a massive challenge for him, not only to get priorities across, but to get actual spending restraint happening in this government. government. So I think it's a lot of talk, candidly, and not a ton of action. And I think there's going to be a real challenge for him in 6 months to a year when we look at the numbers and they're not going to achieve what they're after, and we're going to have these massive deficits.
Well, Emily, the 15%, it starts next year, the 26, 27, 28, but we may get some direction on it now. I don't know. I think if a minister doesn't do their job, he'll just get himself a new minister. That's the read I get from Mark Carney. But how do you think this is going to play out with Canadians as we start to see the details of it all?
I think it's already playing a really hard ball behind the scenes in terms of the pre-budget negotiations or consultations that are happening. For example, if I speak to what's happening in culture and heritage, there is a lot of organizations who are worried about potential cuts. And part of it is that what counts as spending, what counts as investment is very ideological. It's already been proven many times that when you invest in culture, invest is a key word here. That dollar circulates, and it's actually culture is the economy. But sometimes it's not seen that way. And so if it's framed as programming, then it gets cuts and actually shrinks the economy in Toronto and in Montreal, where a lot of the culture, in Vancouver as well, where a lot of the cultural industry is based. And so are those sectors seen as investments, or are they seen as spending? And you can go around with that, and you understand in many different files, and you understand very quickly how even the word spending versus investment is spending. It's just spending that you believe is worthwhile. And so that's the difference. And that the difference there is very, very political. And I think we need to be careful in terms of how we throw those words around, because we tend to sometimes normalize a way to see politics that doesn't actually match the numbers in terms of what dollars is spent actually circulates into the economy versus what goes, for example, into the pockets of private companies sometimes, and the public doesn't actually see it, but it's still framed as if it's spent. And so we need to be really, really watchful in terms of what's going to come out in the budget and whether are there going to be the choices that Mark Carney and his finance minister made in terms of that.
Yeah, it's going to be, the details of that are going to matter. Yeah, the way it has been described to me, Andrew, you've done a budget. I don't know, is that it either buys an asset or, unlocks some private capital, and it has an economic purpose and an economic outcome. So, we'll see on that. But like on the politics of it, we saw Pierre Poilievre today calling for deep cuts in the public sector, saying the government's like a fat man being carried around by the private sector, which is a skinny man, and he almost said, Ottawa needs Ozempic or something. So is there a political risk here on this? How do you see it for the Liberals?
Yeah, there is a big political risk. There's also a fairly significant economic risk. If you look at what's happening in the economy, and Emily makes actually a really good point about where these dollars on the program side move. They are attached to people, and they are attached to jobs, and they're attached to spending. What we've seen with the economic numbers is as the economy is contracting, and it is, the only thing that's really propping things up right now is in fact household spending. And so if you start to undermine that any more than it already is, the housing market in Toronto is a great example of where it just shuts down. But if you're starting to send a signal that people's jobs are at risk, that jobs are being cut, their desire to spend, their desire to personally invest pulls back, and what you create potentially is a very difficult kind of set of recessionary winds that you're going to have to face. So I think that there's a lot more, fortunately we've got a bunch of smart people in the finance department who will figure this stuff out. But the choices are not as easy as just saying, oh, well, you can invest in infrastructure and pull back on all the other spending. That spending is going into healthcare, that spending is going into the provinces, that spending is going into services.
Yeah, a lot of that's going to be ring-fenced, or so we're told. Like those will not be cut. Transfers to provinces, transfers to individuals. So that leaves a lot of jobs. And already in the city hearing about contracts not being renewed, a lot of young people going out the door. And look, speaking of young people, it was youth unemployment. That was a core issue yesterday when the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, came out and said the temporary foreign workers program needs to be scrapped. His argument is that it denies opportunities for young people. Well, today, one of Canada's premiers is siding with Pierre Poilievre on that, saying the temporary foreign worker program needs to be scrapped or reformed. But you might be surprised which premier.
The temporary foreign worker program is not working. It should be canceled or significantly reformed. Here in British Columbia, we see unacceptably high level of unemployment among young people. which has been linked both to the international student visa program as well as the temporary foreign worker program. It's time for a serious and adult conversation about addressing these immigration issues in our province and in the country.
Okay, Amanda, the Poilievre-Eby coalition, is that what we're going to call this? That it's interesting because immigration is a factor, according to reports from like Desjardins and others, in hurting Canadians, young Canadians, from getting jobs. But it's more the students that have been coming in than temporary foreign workers, at least at scale. But it's interesting to see the criticism of the program being picked up by the new Democratic Premier of British Columbia. Not a fan of Mr. Poilievre, but in an agreement on this policy, it seems.
Yeah, because I think it is a policy that is like a head nodder, as you say, for Canadians. We know there's incredible youth unemployment. I think it's the highest it's been since at least 20 years, like pre-COVID we're talking. We put a job out for my company. I had 400 applicants in 24 hours, and I could say the vast majority of them had no qualifications for the job, but just kids are really desperate to get to work. And I think seeing these jobs go to, candidly, temporary foreign workers, and there are places for them in the economy, like agriculture, like some rural communities where they're hard. Yep. Find jobs. But this program has ballooned, it's been abused, and I think this is an example of where the Conservatives are smartly leaning into an issue that would make sense to lots of Canadians, and David Eby's picked that up because he's politically astute and said yes. And we saw the Prime Minister, I think, not fully defend the program, but lightly defend it today, and my guess is he'll shift on that a little bit as he gave window to it. But this is an area I think the Conservatives are going to continue to press, as they should, because I think they're going to have some momentum.
Well, Emily, when the Prime Minister was asked about this the other day, he talked about how the government of Quebec and businesses of Quebec, they say they want this program to stay. There is some data out suggesting that it is not the temporary foreign worker stream. It's more like there were so many international students that came in post-COVID. Conestoga College, and these people had their enrollments quadruple, and that was impinging on the youth market. But it's really just maybe the overall economic slowdown, the recessionary direction we're headed, and youth unemployment's a leading indicator of that. So it's like there's two issues at play here.
There are several issues at play, and that are hard to talk about in broad strokes. To put it simply, the foreign students are not the ones picking the strawberries in Quebec. No. In Quebec fields. No. So it's a temporary workers program encompass so many different things under the sun. It's so vast, and so yes, you have this situation where you have a lot of rural areas across Canada who desperately need. Actually, both international students in terms of keeping some colleges open in those regions, and also for temporary foreign programs. But those programs need also to have pathway to permanent residency and citizenship in many cases. There's a lot of human rights abuse around this country, and that's where sometimes the coalition between the Conservatives and the NDP sometimes connect the dots. It's because those programs, everybody's in agreement that they have huge issues with them, but the attacks come from very, very different angles, depending on who you're speaking to, what realities people have in mind when you think of temporary workers program. Is the status quo acceptable? No. But depending on whether you think that people are stealing jobs or that you're concerned with human rights abuse, your criticism is going to come from opposite side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, and I should clarify that the Conservatives do not want to get rid of the agricultural stream of the program. They right. want to get rid of it basically for everybody else. I was going to go to Michelle, but we just lost your signal there. Andrew, your thoughts on this, because this is becoming a bit of a hot issue. And as we've seen in the past, Pierre Poilievre has a bit of a knack for identifying issues early before they become big ones.
Well, I do think it's important to clarify just what is being talked about and where the real problems are. And certainly the agricultural workers, there are issues there about how that program is used. But I mean, that is a pretty essential part of the economy and pretty hard to reform that. The bigger question is why, and this has been a problem since the Harper government introduced many of these rules way back when they were in office, why they've continued to allow so many large corporations access to the program. You can't just bring in a temporary foreign worker. The government has to approve that. And when you go through a list of the companies who are being approved to bring that in, what you start to see is that a lot of it is designed to try and keep the wages low. And I think that's where the NDP is increasingly tuning into this, not only on the employment side, but also recognizing that this program is essentially being used to depress wages. So we need to understand what removing that looks like. You aren't going to open up a lot of white-collar jobs with this. That's not where the temporary foreign workers are. They're really in the lower-skilled labor market. So as that starts to get pulled out, those wages are going to have to go up, as Canadians will demand that to happen as they take those jobs. But big companies, the big warehouse companies, the fast food restaurants, the restaurant sector itself that is dependent on this will be in for a big price shock, and consumers are going to have to understand that that's part of the consequence of cleaning out this program.
Well, I mean, if they can get the workers, because there are some parts, rural and remote parts of Canada, where it is tough, you know, because there are labor market gaps, and you got to figure out how to do it. So, Michelle, our gremlins keep kicking you off the show. Do not take that personally. It's not a deliberate attempt to silence or censor you. So, while the gremlins are, I don't know, taking their union break, what are your thoughts on this fight over temporary foreign workers?
Well, so I think that, you know, different political pressures make different kind of political allies, let's just say, in terms of Mr. Eby has his own kind of pressures right now. And so I think that this is a kind of an easy shot. You know, it's not a perfect program, but I think, as other panelists have said, remember, the temporary foreign workers are to actually bring in people where you can't find Canadians to take those jobs. And they are also an incredibly important part of the economy if we want to have an agricultural sector. If we want to have, you know, in some cases now it's gone into the services sector, as Andrew was talking about, because we couldn't find Canadians to actually take those jobs. So there's got to be a little bit of a cultural shift too, and that might mean higher wages, which again kind of, you know, spurs on inflation as potential as well. But I think we have to separate out the issue with the foreign students who have been coming in, and perhaps some of those issues in terms of housing and some of the pressures that that's put on our social structures, versus what the use and what the reason behind the temporary foreign workers program was. And I would suspect that there are a lot of Canadians and a lot of Canadian small businesses and a lot of Canadian farmers who will have something to say about what Mr. Poilievre is suggesting in terms of just scrapping it. Because, you know, they're a necessary part of our whole kind of economic supply chain.
Yeah, I get the feeling this is going to be maybe the new carbon tax issue for the Conservatives when Parliament comes back, something that they're going to lead with kind of every day. But I tell you, the international student issue, what's happened with the post-secondary sector as a result of the handling of that is a sleeper issue for the country that we're going to get into on another day. We got to say goodbye. I want to thank the Power Panel, Emily Nicola, Michelle Cadario, Amanda Galbraith, and Andrew Thompson. Thank you so much for being here.